Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Mandy Bynum-McLaughlin. I am the founder, CEO, and principal of Mandy Bynum Consulting. And I'm so honored to close the Black Tech Fest with this ever-pervasive conversation about navigating our workplace and cultures in a quote-unquote crisis. It's been so great to get to know our panelists over the last week. And one thing that's really never ceased to amaze me within my very special peer group, that is while, yes, we are a panel of experts, and yes, all of these women are absolute experts in their field, every time I get to come together with groups of women like this, we are always learning from each other. It's so little to do with who's doing it better, and we're doing this at this company, we're doing this, but our discussions are always about how we collectively can do better as a community in tech, and creating ideas and innovating through meaningful connections and vulnerable conversations. So I am joined today by Tiffany Stevenson, Chief Talent and Inclusion Officer and Global Head of Global Head of Communications at Box. That is correct?
Communities, but we also communicate in our community, so it's all good.
Okay. Great. Yes, we'll get to that. We'll get to that. Casey Lamore, who is head of Industry UK at Pinterest, and Christina Sharif, who is head of Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging at Reddit. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you.
So happy to be with you.
Thank you.
So without further ado, this year has been the absolute most. After, 2 days of this conference, I think it's pretty safe to say we're all aware of what are the challenges that we face in our industry in 2020. So I'm going to start with you, Tiffany. What has this year looked like for you as a head of D&I, and how has your role changed as a result of the external pressures that are within your company?
Yeah, such a great question. And contextually, this is something that we're all probably experiencing from, and I'm so glad to be a part of the conversation. One of the quotes that I think, and every year I sort of have a power one, but this one really resonates for me, from Desmond Tutu, who said that my humanity is bound up in yours, for we can only be human together. And, I think that as a company, we've really had to, lean into, this collective corporate humanity this year. If you think about everything you just mentioned, between the pandemic, between the global reckoning on racial inequality, political instability, market volatility, even natural disasters, which we're experiencing a lot. This isn't business as usual. And what I found is that people of all backgrounds, regardless of where they come from, ethnicity, gender, everyone is experiencing really unparalleled levels of stress and anxiety. And everyone's trying to figure out how to navigate this new normal. And in fact, one stat that really stood out to me from the Society of Human Resource Management, it said that the cost of anxiety and depression on a corporate side globally is going to hit about over $1 trillion this year in productivity loss. So this classic mantra that we've probably had historically around work, that you keep your personal life over here and your professional life here, that's just not true. And companies are really having to step up and really think about the important role that they play on creating safe spaces and a place of healing as they're trying to get their work done and try to communicate with the world. And so I think that when I think about my own role, I think a lot of my role has been really focused on how we can help sort of shift our collective EQ to make sure that we're taking care of our people, and also having something to say in terms of our work actions and then what we say to the world. So I think for us, it's really thinking about how we can up things like our overall manager enablement to make sure that our managers aren't just starting Monday and everyone's hopping on Zoom as if nothing happened. I mean, there's been George Floyd in the US, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, a fire that devastated, California. Those are real issues that are having real impact. Caregiving has a real impact on people right now. So I want managers to feel equipped and empowered to lead with compassion and vulnerability and empathy and awareness. So I would say the work has sort of shifted in that direction, which is cool because I think that the overall, like, this is not a moment, this is a movement. And I think that the door is really wide open for us to kind of take on this kind of collective humanity and really scale it. And I really want to be a part of an organization that wants to go on that journey, which makes me proud to continue the D&I work that we've been doing, but do it in this context where people are more open. And I think that this is really going to shape what inclusion looks like for years to come. So I'm really excited for this season. And to me, that's the only silver lining in all of the madness that's sort of happening around us today.
I want to double click into that in a second. And I do want to reference something you said earlier this week around how your role specifically has gone from one context to another. As heads of, as CDOs, there's often this mental calculus we have to do between protecting leadership and communicating effectively to the rest of the organization. And so how has that shifted for you, Tiffany, or Christina, or Kiese?
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of building on that point of, I think everything that we've learned about management, like if I look at every management book that's downstairs in my office, I don't think 80% of it applies right now. You know, it's like, this is a different world that we're operating in. And, you know, a lot of leadership development curriculum has been around driving results and accountability, achievement, and not enough around seeing people's humanity and understanding the things that are impacting them that affect the context with which they're getting their work done. And if we try to over compartmentalize, we're never going to be able to move a D&I conversation. I can't help you understand racial inequality and inequity if we're not even able to understand that we're coming from different vantage points, or these things that are impacting our day-to-day are showing up in how I'm getting my work done. So, you know, one of the values that we have at Box is bring your blank self to work. And so that means that that's the humanness part as well. And so I think the biggest change from a leadership perspective is helping them really tap into that as another lens or a vector of their overall effectiveness. So we've been having a lot of conversations on how we can enable folks to be more accountable in that space, just like they're accountable for the business results that they drive. They're opposite sides of the same coin. And when you're taking care of me as a human, I can help you take care of the business, and we're going to achieve even more results together.
Yeah.
So I think that's where the conversation has been shifting.
Thank you so much. Yeah. For Christina, we were talking last week about how crisis has literally become, or we talked this morning or this afternoon about how crisis has become our daily lives. And as Black women, we know that we are excellent already because we live our lives in challenge. But this year has especially presented new challenges to white leaders. I've heard a lot of panelists the last 2 days, especially white leaders, talk about the struggles that they've had and their awareness and how they've, you know, changed their kids' schools because of what they've realized this year. And so, Christina, we were talking about how our greatest innovations come out of our biggest crises. And I'd love for you to talk to us about some of the opportunities you've seen as a result of this pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to reiterate what you just said, in that our greatest innovations always come out of our biggest crises. When we think about our personal development and whatever goal that we've had, that's hard, right? And I'm talking anywhere from what we've achieved from a career perspective to losing substantial amounts of weight to whatever it is. The reason why we're so proud when we get to the finish line is because there is an existential crisis that happens in all of these arenas for some period of time, where we're trying to first sort of absorb the decisions or what's happening either around us or through us. And then we're trying to adjust to whatever that new normal is. And then that final stage is sort of getting out on the other side and saying, there's actually some change here. And then finally, after that, it's like maintenance, right? Like, how do we continue? How do we not end up where we were before? And I think that's sort of the overall outline or framework, skeleton framework for any sort of crisis. And one thing that Oprah has said that I always sort of hold on to is that you have to, is that you have to recognize when you're in the middle of a phenomenon. And a lot of times, we think about that when we're like achieving something really great. Like we have to recognize that this is not normal. We need to sort of optimize and maximize on whatever's happening. But I think also it's really effective in the middle of a crisis that has great opportunity to bring results, right? And so right now, in case you did not recognize, we are in the middle of a phenomenon. And while it's hard, there is a great opportunity to sort of come out on the other side of this. So what does that look like? The first thing is we're actually here having vulnerable, open conversations, and without the language that perhaps we were using before to sugarcoat what folks were going through in the workplace. And to be really frank, white people are listening now. White CEOs are listening now. White folks in the C-suite are listening now in a way that it wasn't happening before. So really, from one perspective, that is the opportunity, right? There's no way, like we can talk about business and what it means from a business perspective, and we will, as far as like hard numbers. But in reality, from a society perspective, there's no way to really affect systemic change until we understand that fixing the results of what's happened, fixing the fruit on the tree, will never sustainably yield results if you don't fix the root of the tree. And the root of the tree are the systemic things that have gotten us here. And now folks are starting to pay attention to what has gone wrong systemically to get us here, right? So that's like the first thing that's happening right now. That's a fantastic opportunity.
Oh, I just want to pause.
Yeah, let's pause.
That was brilliant. I just want to chills. Thank you so much. And it's just so true. And I do, we're talking big picture now, and I really do want to get into, we have such a broad audience here today that there are some folks who, I don't know about you all, but for me, it's like, I think that I'm at home, but then I forget that everyone else is at home all the time too. Mm-hmm. Like I just assume everyone else is still going to the office. It's so weird, which is totally non sequitur. But Kise, I wanted to ask you about what's going on in your world. Jonathan Mildenhall yesterday talked to Dion about the importance of a brand's internal practices or a company's internal practices reflecting the image that they're trying to portray through their advertising. And how creativity and brand really does come from addressing and fixing current issues both within their company and the communities to which they serve. I'd love to hear how this has reflected in your work with different brands and different media outlets and your team.
Yeah, so thank you very much for that question. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom out of that question a little bit and just look at it from an industry point of view. And I think we will all agree that at an industry level, what we've witnessed across the board at the back of the pandemic and at the back of the debates about race and racism is really threefold. On one side, you have a group of companies and organizations who've had a knee-jerk reaction, to all of these, to the global pandemic, to the economic, downfall that has ensued, to the debate around race, for fear really of being called out. And as a result, the commitments that they've made to their constituents, be it, their employees, their customers, their shareholders, have ended up being what I call, performative and sometimes tone-deaf actions. We've seen a lot of black squares on Twitter, black squares on LinkedIn. But if you were to fast forward to today and ask the same company at the back of the black squares that you posted, what has actually happened, within your organization and what actually happened from, your services and your products, not much, right? And then you also have a second group of companies and organizations that have decided to really take stock and reevaluate themselves, ask themselves the tough questions in order to define the path forward for the employees and their customers, and how they portray themselves as well, as companies, how they come across, how they communicate. And from the pandemic perspective, what we've seen is a lot of brands pivot their communications, or pivot their processes to really address the needs that people are facing right now, right? And when it comes from the racial debates, what we've seen is a renewed sense of urgency and a reprioritization and acceleration, in fact, in the way that they are pushing and driving for representation and diversity across their organization, across their products. And this usually, what I've noticed is that these usually come from companies that have invested heavily and honestly in properly educating themselves, that have invested in providing safe spaces for these conversations to happen, because ultimately you can't be effective in fixing a problem that you don't understand first. And I think, putting the effort and putting your money where your mouth is has been very important in helping organizations move in that. And then, you still have the third bucket of organization that are still trying to figure this whole thing out. I don't really know if it's out of denial or if it's out of, just the fact that they need to figure this out. And it's fine, right? We need to enable individuals and organizations to really have their own journey towards that. But what I have to say, though, as much as we need to enable people's space to grow, whichever category you fall into, as a brand, as a company, as an organization, as a government, you need to be aware that there was life 2020 BC. So that's not before Christ, that's before Corona. Okay.
Yes, I've been using that too.
There was life since Corona. And that 2020 really has provided the fuel to be unapologetic about the demands, to really uproot and dismantle systemic racism in our respective organizations and society on one hand, but also on the other hand, when you look at it about, from the pandemic point of view and the economic downfall and how companies are functioning right now, the need to really modernize the way we work, right? So work has to work around life and not life to work around work. So whichever way you choose, whichever response you choose, you have to be aware that you will be held accountable. There is nowhere to hide now, nowhere.
You can hide behind, you can turn your camera off. That
would
we know you ain't in the office.
An hour.
We know you're home. And that's so true. And what it makes me think about is when I talk to companies now, it is, I've gone from BC to saying like, we would love an unconscious bias training for like our whole company. I think we really need like an awakening. And now I'm hearing like, I don't know what to do. Like, I know I need to do something. I've done all the research, I've read books, and like, I just don't know what to do. And I think that has been so much more productive because we can kind of skip that whole value selling of like diversity. We can skip the whole business case, because whether or not you believe it's something that is going to drive performance of your business, you have to do something. And like you were saying, Kiesa, you can't hide. And so let's kind of go into in our company now. We've talked about what's some of the external pressures and how leaders are responding. And now we have leaders internally who are seeing people's pets, are seeing people's children, are seeing people wearing shorts instead of pants on video. And we are having, I feel more connected to our humanity than ever before, because we can catch each other at home and we see so much more context than just our office. And so with people who are earlier in their career, who are, in the BC, we would have said, you got to knock on that person's door and like kick their office door down and go talk to them. You have to catch them and do a walk and talk, coffee date. What are some ways that we, or not we, folks who are early in their career can do things differently to connect with their leaders and influence folks in order to give themselves a better brand within their own company? You're on mute, Christina.
It would be helpful if if you heard me. I think that's a great question. I think there has to be some meeting in the middle, though. One of the things I think that we're really emphasizing with leaders is like, first of all, even in the within inclusion right now, there's so much intersectionality, right? Because we have like including while now leading a distributed workforce, like how do we make everyone sort of feel included in the business? And then of course, from the ethnic, racial, gender perspective. But one of the things that I think is really important for leaders right now is that they're making an absolute intentional effort around making sure that their teams feel included, that they're available, that there's regular one-on-ones, whether or not they were happening in the office. It's so pertinent right now to make sure that those things are happening so that there's no way that you're going to catch someone at the proverbial water cooler right now. So it's important to be intentional about it. But for new hires who might be like a little bit scared I think what they should know is that folks don't have more time right now, but for somehow they're more open to putting time on their calendar. Even if it's a 20 minutes, hey, can we catch up and I can get to know you a little bit better? Do you have 20 minutes to chat over a virtual coffee? I'm finding that people are more open to those things. I'll take it one step further. Folks that are looking for jobs that are not necessarily talking like within their organization. I've even found that externally having, reaching out to sort of doing a cold call and asking folks to pick their brain for 20 minutes, they've been more open to it versus when we were in the office. And again, I don't think it's on account of that we're less busy by any means, but somehow the paradigm has shifted a bit so that, again, that humanity is sort of shining through a little bit more.
Yeah. And Tiffany, you were talking about the focus on frontline managers and how important it is to engage with them, because we have all these programs for individual contributors. We have these white glove trainings for leaders. And what about the frontline managers?
Yeah, well, a couple of things have happened for us this year that were sort of independent of the pandemic. But one is we wanted to make sure that there was sort of a clear remit for all boxers. And so what is that common framework and how does that scale by level? So we recently rolled out a career framework that's based on 4 vectors. So business, team, self, and community. And by launching that and having behaviors by level, we've been able to more clearly articulate for anyone who's leading people in teams, what does that look like in terms of self? Am I vulnerable? Am I open to feedback? Can my team members bottom up give me feedback? From a team perspective, am I putting bias towards developing and being a multiplier and having, receipts of successful people who are matriculating on my team? From a community standpoint, really understanding where inclusion is either strong or falling short and taking proactive efforts to do that. And then just being a leader in our company, are you actually putting discretionary time and helping to drive the efforts of community? Like, are you showing up to events? Are you volunteering to be a mentor or even a new hire buddy? So I think like level 1 was just being really clear on what we expect of leaders. And I think that gave us a great platform to relook at the education that we're providing to make sure that we're like enabling people to walk that walk. And so 3 times a year, we have a learning curriculum called LearnFest, and we have a program for managers, and we've been able to do some of that stitching and doing it virtually. But I think in light of everything that was happening, we also took advantage of other things. So monthly, we have what's called a manager power hour, where managers can just come for an hour and we talk about talent topics. And that gave us a forum to say, folks are not okay. And we need to make sure that you feel more equipped for that Monday morning conversation. And how might that need to change your one-on-one topics that you cover? What should you be talking about in your team meetings that's helping to reinforce it? So I think just overall, I think everyone should be looking at what their philosophy is, good or bad, but making sure that what you're actually measuring people on and sort of setting their management progression and promotion should match the type of leadership that you hope to see in the organization. And then I think that gives you opportunities to look at how you think about learning and development, and then all the conversation outputs you have to try to help make sure that it's self-reinforcing.
Yeah. Can I add something here? In a lot of the conversations that we've had, since the pandemic started, and at Pinterest or in this conversation and in other events, there's been a renewed focus on providing managers with the right tools to support their teams via the crisis. But I think I would like to take a step back a little bit and then ask the question, but who's taking care of the leaders? Who is taking care of the leaders? Because it's been such an anxiogenic time, and still is, that, as much as we are enabling our leaders to show up for their teams and support their teams, leaders also need to be supported, and also leaders need to acknowledge and tap into their own humanity and recognize, sorry, that's my kid.
Oh, good.
I'm planning that. and recognize when they need to take a break, when they need to stop, replenish, refresh, and continue running again. This is a marathon. It's not a 100-meter sprint.
That's
and I
right.
think that is one element that we need to bear in mind. And even as teams, we also need to support our managers and support our leaders through that journey, because they are bearing a lot on their shoulders. And at some point, you can't give what you don't have, right? And we need to enable them to continue giving and to continue giving them the ability to help us help them.
You can't serve from an empty cup. And it is so interesting that a lot of leaders still, especially those in the C-suite, it's like we forget that we have to set the example in every context. And a big part of that is when we take care of ourselves. And when we don't do that, it's still, even though like it's you who feels the internal pressure, you are still setting the example for your team that like they should be accessible at any time, because you're making yourself accessible at any time.
Mm-hmm. I'll tell you, one of the things that I really appreciate about Reddit, I mean, our mission is to create community and belonging for everyone in our platform. And one of our platform values is remember the human. And I love seeing that exemplified internally amongst the leadership team. I will tell you, there's some members of the C-suite that that they have children. They're not really dialed in after 6 because it's bath time, it's dinner time, can we talk about this tomorrow? I promised my kids a bike ride today. I love that because then it gives everyone else sort of the permission to also make sure that we're leaning in at the right times to the right things. And, there is absolutely a time to lean into work, and there's absolutely a time to lean into family, because as much as we're talking about the effects of this pandemic on our work life and what it's meant for our employees and what it's meant for our C-suite, there's also a huge implication of what it's meant to our families as well. And if you have children, you kind of know that there's been a large burden on them this year, but particularly in the US, where some schools are not even going back yet. And so really, I've seen it exemplified in our C-suite where, they're also taking the time to say, hey, we're human. Here's what it looks like behind the curtain. And you have permission to be human as well.
So this is probably the time where I tell you that I have 2 kids, but they're locked up in the basement and I take them out.
Excuse me, 911.
JK, they're on a walk with grandma.
But I do think, I think one of the things that I hope survives this season that we're in is just what you described, Christina, and also just being more open about even topics like mental health, like things that you never ever, like there's like a badge of shame that you carry because you at some point need to take the cape off and get help from someone else. And I think that what we're experiencing now is trauma. It's trauma in so many different ways. I've had so many parents that I've just, been on a Zoom call and you just watch the parent be like, I'm losing my ish right now. My child will not sit down and everything is happening. And it's just like, and you can't sustain, that's not sustainable. And it's like, at some point, we just need to make that okay. And I've been really proud of the efforts that we've had to just put mental health and mental wellness as a part of just a normal conversation. And I think that is one of the things, like it isn't a part of your body. Just like if you break your arm, you go put a cast on it. It's like this kind of, you eat vegetables so that you have a healthy body, like making sure that you have someone that you can talk to, that you have resources, that we're creating safe spaces where people can just talk about what's going on. Like those are not insignificant things. And those investments will pay off in the long run and get us through this madness.
Yeah. So speaking about, crisis and who's taking care of leaders, I've had some conversations with one person in particular this week who was a white male leader who was talking about, and I think that we have navigated this for a long time, and it's the patience for people who are not there yet. The patience for people who are just realizing that, oh my gosh, I didn't realize such and such person of color, that this was their experience. I just had no idea. And on one end, it's like, come on, where have you been the last 6 months, at least, or your whole life?
A few hundred,
or 200 years.
Or just ever. But it's also like, I think as leaders, we are always like, okay, fellow person of color, like we got to play our cards, because we got to take small steps, and let's focus on the real and on the small wins. And tell me about like what those conversations have been like with folks who are like losing patience, and how you push back on them to be more, I suppose, I don't want to say calculated, but more plotted in the wins that they have, as opposed to like continuing to get angry.
Mm-hmm. I always liken it to building a house. And I say, hey, look, in order to build an effective house, we need a really strong foundation. And we're building the foundation. You're already wanting to put the finishes on the kitchen sink. I get it, but we're not there yet. And if we build the house too quickly and we jump straight to the finishes, as soon as the wind blows, the house crumbles. It is much more effective to build a strong foundation and take the time to do that, and build a really sturdy, sustainable house where, in 10 years from now, it is now part of our corporate DNA. It is part of our culture. There's not two programs. There's not a diversity and inclusion program and a business strategy, right? It's where they're now one. We eat, breathe, and sleep D&I as part of, we could not fathom carrying on our normal business strategy without these really important elements. That's where we're trying to get to. And although you want to see something happen really, really quickly, if we do that without first really affecting the mindset, without doing the education, and without taking the time and the resources to build it correctly, we're not going to be able to sustain it long term. So hold your horses, and thank you so much for working with us at every stage and helping to build this really strong foundation, so that we all have a really fantastic place to work with thoughtful, educated, and woke leaders, now and in 10 years from now.
Yeah.
And I think one of the other elements sometimes, when people say, oh, change is not happening fast enough. And, we've been having this conversation since for 400 years, we've been trying to, justify our existence, what's not. I think one of the first elements that I tend to do is, sometimes people want to feel validated and heard, right? When they are expressing a frustration. So I tend to provide that validation and that, ear, and yes, we've heard, and we're hearing, we're listening. But on the other end, what is important to do as well is to say, yes, we are not where we need to be, but thank God we are not where we used to be. And try to really appreciate the progress that we've made so far, because yes, we are still experiencing police brutality today. Yes, we are still experiencing racism today. Yes, we're still experiencing discrimination today. But the very fact that we can have this conversation right now, the four of us, definitely means that we are not experiencing what Rosa Parks, experienced, or what Harriet Tubman experienced. Do you see what I mean? So it's about also appreciating the victories that we have accomplished along the way, that would give us the strength to continue. And when it comes to 2020 in particular, the reason why I am grateful despite everything that is happening, is that it is a year that has provided, honestly, the electroshock that we all needed as society to wake up from our somnambulism, and the catalyst for change, right? I don't think that some of the conversations that we are having today about, the future of work, about digitalization, about, diversity, inclusion, representation, racism, would have taken place, or at least to this extent and this intensity, if we hadn't gone through the pandemic, if we hadn't witnessed the cold-blooded murder of George Floyd. And really, that change can only take place when there is acknowledgement that there's a problem. And that is happening right now. Like I've said, there was a 2020 BC, and there's a 2020 since Corona, since, George Floyd, since Breonna Taylor. And we need to be able to appreciate how far we've come through this journey.
I agree. The thing I would add is I think it's really building on the last two comments, but I think also one of the things that we've tried to do is just be 100% transparent about our roadmap and sort of where we are and what is the framework with which we operate. So, our model is based on 3 pillars of hiring, belonging, and thriving. Underneath each of those, there's some clear actions that we're taking. And my goal is that everyone can find themselves in the story. But the more transparent we are in what we're doing, it's like, I would rather channel our energy to really make sure, and to Christina's point, that this foundation, as we're building, help us with that foundation. And the sooner we get this foundation up and running, then there's more that we can continue to do off of that to get to the skylights and the kitchen fixtures. So I just try to bias towards just making sure everyone has access to the same information, tools, and resources so that we can all, it takes all of us together. D&I is definitely a team sport. So let's see how we can leverage in the ways that, in individual ways that people want to plug in.
Mm-hmm. But also just being human. It is quite frustrating. I mean, like, if we were just going to be honest about it, right? Like, to Kizzy's point, like, we've been having this conversation for how long? The truth is, I don't know if we've been having a conversation. I mean, we've been talking, but right. Conversation, I mean, like, no, they're all like, we've been talking, but I don't know if people are listening like they're listening now. And we talk about George Floyd, we talk about Breonna Taylor. In the UK, I mean, 2019, we talk about Trevor Smith, whose case was very similar to Breonna Taylor's. We talk about Sarah Reed in 2016, whose case was very similar to Sandra Bland. And, this has been we've had multiple global pandemics happening at the same time. And I just feel like maybe now the real conversation is just starting versus we're exhausted because we've been having the conversation, but we haven't been getting anywhere with it. It's like been talking to a blank wall, and now we're starting to get the engagement of other people.
Yeah, and really, it's sometimes I was talking to one of my best friends a few days ago, and we were talking about some of the things that we've realized this year, and I feel like to a certain extent, it feels like all the crises that we've gone through this year have made us human again. And what I mean by that is that it gave us the ability to feel again really deeply. Because quite frankly, when you look at potentially 2019, 2018, I feel like we had gotten to a point where a lot of us were becoming desensitized to the issues that plague our organization and that plague our societies. And really everything that's happened this year has enabled us to experience is really just like the veil of privilege being torn, the scales of privilege falling out from our eyes and enabling everybody to actually see, which I don't think people were doing before. We were not seeing before. We were not feeling before. Yeah. We were just, we had become, we were starting, working and living autopilot almost, right? Yeah. And then 2020 came in, electroshock, and then all of us woke up to our humanity. And I think that for me is something to celebrate.
Absolutely. And it also makes me think about the fact that people everyone's on a continuum. So of just being sort of, I'm not woke, I'm totally asleep, to like, I'm actually out here driving the systemic change, and everyone can plot themselves on that continuum. Our goal always is to push them farther along. But I think that we have folks who actually are farther along, and how can we leverage them as champions to even help bring others into the conversation? But I think just recognizing that people are where they are, and we certainly have things that we can do to help move them along, but how can we leverage the folks who are champions today, and what else can we do to drive that agenda? And then I think over time, with this collective shock, as I said, it's like we can start to move more folks along, but we're in a company of unique individuals who all bring different experiences. And so they are in different stages. And I think if it's causing harm, I think that's where we can laser in and say, what is the harm? How do we address that in a more tailored way? But I think overall, lifting our organization and helping people move, I think is what we're here to do.
We don't have a lot of time left, unfortunately. I did want to get to one more thing, if possible. You know, we've been talking a lot about our companies and what's happening in society. But as Casey was saying, the four of us probably have a lot of privilege that maybe we didn't recognize before this year. For me personally, thinking about the folks who do not have access to government programs because they don't have internet, because they can't pay for that anymore. And for me, like all of my woes, like trying to move, trying to build a house, like I have been getting so frustrated with my own personal issues. And then I get more guilty thinking about like, these are champagne problems, why are you upset? And then like having this like downward spiral of emotions about how a terrible person I am. So that's me. I would like to know what this year and this journey has been like for you personally, and recognizing like your role in dismantling this whole thing that's going on.
I feel, so from a privileged perspective, right? I feel much like you in terms of, it's been a real mirror for me to be able to look at even the ways in which I'm privileged. And frankly, I think that mirror has been bubbling up over the last few years. Even when our brothers and sisters in the LGBTQ plus community, right, have been fighting for equal rights for several years now. And the privilege that as a cisgendered woman, I don't have to come out to people. Like I don't have, and so that's been really bubbling up over the last few years. But also specifically this year, the privilege that I have has absolutely become evident for me. But one thing I will say is that with that privilege, I also have the opportunity to be self-reflective and help other people. And I've been really intentional about making sure that I'm using not only my resources, but also my expertise, because this is kind of what I do and it's needed right now. And this is a point in time where I think we could really leverage who we are as human beings, but also the professional backgrounds that we've had and possibly the educational backgrounds that we've had to really help affect change, not only for ourselves, but earlier this year, I did a lot of consulting with other organizations and just facilitating conversations between the C-suite and their employees. And those things are important too. And we have them. The fact that we're here having this conversation together today means that we have those things that even if nothing else, we could leverage that privilege and help someone else.
From my point of view, honestly, I'm going to be really short because Christina said it all and so perfectly. I think it's important, to acknowledge when you have privilege. Privilege is not a dirty word. And I think, there's a lot of fragility and defensiveness when you throw the word privilege around. It's not a dirty word. It's what you do with that privilege that becomes either dirty or clean. That's all I have to say.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I don't even know what else to say with that other than yes to all. And I think the big thing is, I have a platform and not being afraid to use that platform to be a facilitator for change, a convener for change, working with other tech companies to think about how we fix it for every D&I leader that might be going alone. It's like we are strength in numbers. And so what can we do together to not only fix the issues that we have within our own organizations, but make sure that we're creating a diverse tech pipeline that's going to land us for generations to come. And that is what I want to be held accountable for.
Tiffany, Casey, Christina, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful conversation. I could talk to you all day, but Casey, it's time for wine, dinner, bath time, whatever comes next. And thank you everyone at Black Tech Fest. This has truly been an honor. And go forth